Welcome to today's deep dive, listeners. We're going to be exploring something today that's often seen as a really personal thing, but when you get down to it, it's got these huge political and philosophical implications woven right through it. We're talking about disability.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we often think about disability as like individual experiences,
Mm.
right? But it's really deeply tied to how we structure our societies, how political theories deal with, or sometimes don't deal with, the rights and the inclusion of people with disabilities.
And to really get a handle on this, we're going all the way back to prehistory, our guide for this journey through time. Excerpts from Ciudadanía y Discapacidad by Javier Perez Rubio. Get ready to uncover how different cultures across the ages have viewed and treated disability.
It's pretty amazing when you realize just how far back we can actually trace the evidence of disability. Like, there's this fascinating case of a Neanderthal skeleton, they call him the old man, who lived, get this, to be about 50 to 55 years old.
Wow. Okay, so we're talking way back. What's so special about this Neanderthal, this old man?
Well, the old man, he shows signs of really severe arthritis. Can you imagine the pain, the limited mobility, especially back then? And he still lived a pretty long life, which suggests that his community took care of him. It challenges that whole survival of the fittest idea, doesn't it? It seems like even then, communities were wrestling with what it meant to be inclusive.
That's really powerful. It makes you realize how our understanding of what disability is, well, it's shaped by what we value and, of course, what we know at the time.
Exactly. And if we fast forward a bit to ancient China, for instance, we find a very different perspective on disability. Think foot binding. This practice, intentionally restricting women's mobility, it was considered a mark of beauty, high social status. It really makes you think what one culture might call a disability could be seen as desirable in another.
It's kind of mind-blowing how much cultural values can shape our perceptions, isn't it? Makes
Mhm.
you wonder how future generations will judge our views. But when we talk about ancient civilizations and disability, we kind of have to talk about ancient Greece. They were obsessed with physical perfection, right?
Oh, absolutely. Those idealized images of, perfectly proportioned bodies, those weren't just about aesthetics. It represented this deep-seated belief in physical and mental perfection, a concept that was woven into their whole social and political fabric. It's called the precedence model, and it often led to excluding people with disabilities from public life.
So how did this whole belief in perfection thing actually play out? How did they treat people with disabilities?
Well, in some cases, pretty harshly. Take Sparta. Their whole military culture led them to practice infant exposure. Basically, newborns with disabilities, they were often abandoned. It's shocking to us now, but back then it came from this belief that only the strong could contribute.
Wow, that's pretty chilling. A stark example of how values can be used to justify exclusion, I guess.
Yeah.
So if Sparta represents the extreme, how did Athens, the birthplace of democracy, approach disability?
Athens, well, they weren't as outwardly harsh as Sparta, but they still clung to this idea of the perfect citizen, and that inherently left out anyone with disabilities. They might not have systematically abandoned infants, but they were still largely left out, denied basic rights. Shows the limits of their democracy, really, when it came to inclusivity.
It seems like for the ancient Greeks, it was more about forcing people to fit this rigid mold than adapting society to embrace all abilities.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. And as we move on from Greece to Rome, we see this precedence model continue, though maybe with a slightly different approach. The Romans, they were known for practicality, right? So they took a more, I guess you could say, calculated approach.
Calculated, what do you mean?
So while they also practiced infant exposure, Roman law said you needed 5 neighbors to approve it. Can you imagine? This chilling form of community consensus weighing a child's disability against their potential contribution to society.
Okay, so a more bureaucratic form of exclusion, but still exclusion.
Mhm.
Did the Romans make any progress, though, in how they saw or treated people with disabilities?
You know, their practicality did lead to some integration, but often in roles that were seen as suitable for their, let's say, limitations. For example, people with dwarfism were sometimes employed as entertainers. Really shows the complexity of their views.
It's like a double-edged sword, isn't it? Recognizing their existence and contributions, but still putting them in a box based on their differences. It's something we still see today, even now.
It's true. And this push and pull between inclusion and exclusion, between recognizing the worth of individuals with disabilities and trying to fix them or control them, it continues throughout history. The rise of Christianity, for instance, brings a whole new set of complexities to the table, challenging some old ideas while sadly perpetuating others.
Ooh, a cliffhanger. We'll get into those complexities of Christianity and disability when we return. Stick around.